So if you just say next time. March.
All right. Then you can get put your thumb drive in here. Perfect. We open
Alzheimer's disease and other dementias.
Do you want me to share the screen?
Yeah.
No. He's gonna be today.
Oh, come on. Okay. Oh, I'm so over this.
No. No. Actually, I go all over the church. Too many questions.
Yeah.
So be it. Oh, seven.
I don't know that I'm going to be able to. We don't have PowerPoint on this machine in a licensed way. I'm trying to use my Microsoft 360 account and it's not taking it. Let me try one more time. Yeah, I'm so sorry. The other way this could work is, you know, can it be opened with Drive?
Yes, I'm almost the only one.
You may have to do that. Let me just try this. So sick of. Let me try one more thing, Walter.
Well, you did bring up the power.
Well, but it won't let me play it. It's Microsoft being proprietary. So I think I might be able to. I'm just going to try one more thing. No, I know it's us.
Microsoft's really pretty on these.
Oh,
Yeah. The poor deers.
That's their part.
Yeah. Where's play? Oh, there we go, slideshow. Okay. I got everybody. We're taking off this.
Yes.
You can make a lot of money. Some of these problems.
Knowing how to go around.
All righty. So John, if you just want to, I think as Walter needs to advance the slides, did you see just the enter?
Yeah.
Because this mouse is not connected.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Your friendly pastor and IT support.
Walter, I'll just turn this over to you. Let's open with a word prayer. Okay, good.
We thank you for your goodness. We thank you for this day. We thank you for the gift of our minds. We pray that you might help us as we learn about persons who are having cognitive difficulties. Help us to be mindful, help us to be compassionate, help us to be your servants. All that we do, pray this in Christ. Amen. So, apologies in advance if you heard this lecture a couple of years ago, this year, but John thought that there's still a lot of interest in the topic, and all of you are 2 years older as am I. So some things bear repeating. I have updated the presentation a little bit. Some new findings, but everybody here knows someone who has had chronic decline, and it's one thing when it's abstract, somebody you don't know. Is quite another thing when it's your mother, when it's your father, when it's your brother, your sister, and so it hits differently. And so just wanted to talk a little bit about Alzheimer's disease and other dementias, and just a little general information that is sometimes confusing. In talking, I'm a clinical neuropsychologist. My primary field of expertise is traumatic brain injury and dementia. Retired from the VA a couple of years ago. Was previously at Baylor College of Medicine at the University of Kentucky School. And started working with the VA full time when I got very interested in concussion and post-traumatic stress disorder. Urges there, but a lot of my practice at the VA was triaging dementia and making sure people were on the right medications and staging dementia. The first question I would often get from families is, well, what's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's? Anybody have that question? Next, that.
Did he say the black buttons?
He said return.
He said,
Yeah, I gotta find it.
either page down or the arrow down.
I guess that's the one that we.
Right here, page down. Let's see if I press this one, I press this one, I press this one. Page up. And oh, no, I don't know. I'm not. All right. That's the only one I didn't do.
All right. Maybe, yeah, all right, so actually, if you just hit the button here on the side, this is going backwards.
Oh,
Oh, no, that's going forward. All right. Now, how do I get it? Oh, here's there's a button right there. All right. Okay, right there.
it's
All right.
right there. Okay.
All right, so.
So what is dementia? It's a generic term, it just simply means a decrease in mental abilities. But there are many diseases that cause decline in mental abilities that are age related, and many diseases that can cause the dementia. Of course, one that everybody knows about is Alzheimer's disease, but also cardiovascular disease can result in cardiovascular disease, small vessel disease can result in a lot of small infarctions to the brain, and those can, can cause dementia. And underappreciated is many cases are really a mixed picture. Just because you have Alzheimer's disease doesn't mean you don't also have cardiovascular disease, and they can exacerbate each other. Frontotemporal dementias. Everybody's heard of Bruce Willis and the celebrity that's probably best well known as frontal dementia, and he has, and oftentimes associated with frontal dementia is what we call primary progressive aphasia, which is what Bruce Willis has. And then there's Lewy body dementia, the celebrity that everybody knows about. It's Robin Williams, Lewy body dementia. Parkinson's disease in the late stages can cause dementia. Huntington's disease can hit their cognitive effects early on. HIV can result in dementia, and a traumatic brain injury. Everybody has heard of chronic traumatic encephalopathy football players. Next slide, John. So Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia. There are genetic risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. The most well-studied genetic factor is APOE. The more bad copies of that gene that you have, the greater the risk for dementia.
What is APOE?
It's the name of no, it's the name of a gene. Google, what the it's a long. Say that again.
Do you do genetic testing?
No, it's not routinely done, but it's being done more and more frequently, and you can find out your risk for with that. It's not just APOE, there are other genes. There are probably 20 other ones, and some association ones. It's a multifactorial problem. The thing that marks Alzheimer's disease, plaques and tangles that you see in the brain on autopsy. You can't see them in a regular scan. The only kind of scan that you can see it in is a PET scan, not even a regular MRI, but a positron emission tomography. You can see the plaque there, and that's probably used to be the only way to get a diagnosis for Alzheimer's disease was on autopsy. But you can visualize the plaque, beta, and the protein is associated with this beta amyloid protein that you can see on the PET scans. And then there are tangles, fibrous tangles of neurons made of tau, another protein called tau. So it's a big factor. And these clumps are thought to damage healthy neurons. That's where a lot of the research has been. Although there's increasingly, people think that there are a lot of researchers saying, those are just a byproduct of whatever else is going on, it's kind of garbage that accumulates. So most of the research has been around trying to eliminate the beta amyloid plaque or interfere in the deposition of tau protein. But that those have limited success. We'll talk about that a little more. John?
Yeah, you didn't mention pyrons.
Prion disease? Yeah,
Pyron gene of
yeah, that's
source here.
yeah, the prions Jakob Creutzfeldt, which I did mention, is associated with prion disease. And so, you can get Jakob Creutzfeldt by eating somebody else's brain, or the folks related mad cow disease is also. But those are pretty rare cases.
My wife's husband died.
Oh, no.
And they thought one of my had.
Well, not generic to those.
Yeah,
I don't think.
it's 1 out of 1 million, I think. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
The symptoms of Alzheimer's disease: continuous decline in thinking, behavioral, and social skills that disrupts the person's ability to function. Typically, if there's an amnestic presentation, like to have difficulty remembering recent events, conversations, both what neuropsychologists call episodic memories, what we call a specific episode. The neuropsychologists talk about a lot of different kinds of episodic type of memory that is calling card of Alzheimer's disease. It's, if you want to use a computer analogy, it's difficulty reading and writing from the hard drive. Right.
So is this signified by loss of short-term memory or long-term memory to be a certain?
Yeah, the short term, usually people refer to it as short term memory. Episodic is a little bit more specific.
So you can't remember today, but you can remember 25 years ago.
Yeah, and so, there are a lot of things that one thing. So the things that we think about memory is that it's not static. It changes over time. Every time I recall a memory, there's a lot of other things going on in my brain. And so when I recall memory, whatever else is going on in my brain somehow becomes attached to it. So that memory, there's a lot of research that's done with eyewitness testimony, and people know how under classic studies done by Elizabeth Loftus in the 70s and 80s. Our memories are very faulty, and so when we're able to remember things a long time ago, it's sometimes difficult to know if we're actually remembering the event or remembering our recollection of the event. And so
Our perspective.
right. And so, but yes, but the other kinds of memory we talk about, like semantic, for example, I know this for watch requires some degree of memory to know that it's a watch. I remember a specific episode where I learned what a watch is. Okay, that's something that language, most of that language is put into something we call semantic. And it's not susceptible. And yes, susceptible. Things like Alzheimer's disease. When there's a place in the anterior part of the temporal lobe called the hippocampus that is very important for storing these, an event. Okay, remembering what you ate for breakfast this morning, or what you did yesterday. And so that's that area that hippocampus is vulnerable to a lot of etiologies. Alzheimer's is one. Traumatic brain injury, those anterior tips, temporal lobe are very vulnerable to a lot of different. So these progresses, however, the other cognitive functions can decline as well. And more distressing to families really are behavioral changes that are sometimes accompanied. Sometimes behavioral changes are subtle and not real potential. Oftentimes they're quite dramatic. And often unawareness of the cognitive problems, or at least the severity of the cognitive problem, as the disease progresses, missing the fancy word for say anosognosia, the ability to know oneself. The person may know that they have memory problems, maybe acknowledge that they have memory problems, but they don't understand the significance of it, or will not, yeah, I can still, I have problems, I can still drive, I can still, I can take care of my bank account. But so that unawareness of cognitive problem completely, or the implications of severity of the problem. So Alzheimer's disease has stages. The pre-dementia stage where it's good to get a diagnosis early on is the mild cognitive impairment stage. It's a pre-dementia stage. The person is more forgetful than normal age-related decline, and things do decline with age. Even regardless of whether we have Alzheimer's disease, there are few individuals who show remarkable brains who don't show that age-related decline. But the person with mild cognitive impairment is still functional and competent. When it progresses to mild dementia, the problems are usually severe enough. Classifies dementia, following a neuropsychological evaluation. Person's still competent to make decisions, but they need the protection of their family to make sure that they're considering everything that they did consider. But if you structure the problems for the person, they can still make decisions. When they progress to the moderate dementia stage, they really can't make those decisions on their own anymore, and need some help. That doesn't mean, and I don't want to draw a technical to reach that stage either. There are technical ways to stage it. But I always tell the families, even though they may not be able to make those decisions for themselves, but that doesn't mean that their input should not be considered, and they can still oftentimes participate in those decisions. Now that gets very, it's easier said than done. The person has anosognosia and doesn't realize that they have the problems, but as much as possible. And then severe dementia, the stages. Next slide, John.
I have a question. Before you go on, the neuropsych evaluation is an important, very important part of the whole process.
Well, you're asking that to a neuropsychologist.
But we have a friend who needs that neuropsych evaluation, and you can't get it for months. He has to go to Phoenix to get it. So, and in order to get help, the neuropsych evaluation is absolutely essential.
Yeah, well, most neurologists don't want to prescribe any medication unless the neuropsychologist has established that there's evidence of cognitive decline. When people come in and say, I'm having problems, and the neurologist's office is difficult to quantify that. There's one neurologist at UNM who's he's a wannabe neuropsychologist. He does really wonderful cognitive exams, but most neurologists really are interested in that.
How extensive is that evaluation?
Well, it depends, but I can do the dementia eval as well. Sometimes, some people, there's some neuropsychologists will do a 6-7 hour exam, but you can do a reasonably thorough one in a couple hours for dementia.
So how do you screen if someone has hearing loss? And that they don't understand.
Well,
they don't hear you.
Well, you have to be send them to an audience, just their concerns, but I mean, there are screening. Psychologists, the person's not very, and certainly hearing problems, people put it as a risk for dementia. I'm not quite sure that I follow that, but obviously you have to get into a professional before you can evaluate whether they understand what standard.
Well, I was reading the statistics that there, in our generation, there are going to be so many people that live alone, maybe 40% or more are going to live alone. And so it's that whole question of how to they get help if they're unaware that they're losing their ability to live by yourself and just based your own life versus when you're in a family situation.
Well, self-appraisal is notoriously one of the ones somebody else is doing that time, my experience, relying on somebody. I think it is important to note, that there, for example, people who were educated and operated at a very high level, they can notice changes, subtle changes, that and still test well within normal limits for psychological evaluation. And some of my colleagues at the University of Kentucky, then they published a paper a few years back showing people who were still functioning normally in their psychological sense, but had no reporting, that they were noticing that they were at their risk of so that isn't necessarily true of every individual. My clinical experience, highly functional people, notice it more. If you're used to using all of your brain at a very high level, and something that's interfering with that efficiency, you're more likely to notice it if you're not doing something every day that's high taxing. That's my job.
Well, I always, I look at this as you had the word hard drive, and there's a terminology called seek time. It's the head is here, and you got to wait for the disk all the way around before it can be read. And I see my seek time changing.
Yeah.
It's taking a few more, maybe seconds. I was thinking, it could be just. I've been told it's age related. Yeah.
But the other thing that neuropsychologists like to talk about is something we call working memory, which is really what the frontal lobes do. It's the CPU of the brain. It's what you load the program up into. And that as we get older, that working space seems to contract. And that's
I'd say it's just that the truth ball and I lost the access.
So besides Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia, back when I started graduate school, it was this neurologist was teaching part of the neuroscience course in the clinical portion, and it was Dr. Goldstein at the University of Michigan. There was this new thing called there's this new thing called Alzheimer's disease, and not all of dementia is caused by hardening of the arteries. This was big news in 1977, 78, because that's what everybody thought caused dementia, hardening arteries, and now it's gone, we've seen the pendulum swing, everything's Alzheimer's disease, we forget about cardiovascular disease, and it's really quite common. And it's caused by damaged blood vessels that supply the brain, strokes, or more commonly, it's a chronic ischemia, in certain areas of the brain, and those blood vessels that go to the hippocampus, are very vulnerable. So the things that are risk factors are the same thing that we all know about, like exercise, obesity, high cholesterol. A huge one is diabetes, as well as genetic factors. Next slide, John. So it oftentimes presents in my clinical practice with subtle problems with executive functioning, problems with that frontal lobe function that CPU Peter was talking about. And it's usually caused by you'll see some changes on the MRI scans and what we call the periventricular white matter, the connecting, the axons connecting different brain areas. You'll see, damage in that area. People have difficulty solving problems and having organization. Less memory problems with Alzheimer's disease additionally. That's prototypic. I've certainly seen, cases of my mother where they clearly have, vascular compromise in the ganglia area. Doesn't show up. It's called Alzheimer's progression. They have a little stroke there. There's cases like that all the time. So in general, most of the cases look more executive, but we'll see those cases that just depending on what area of the brain got hit with the vascular disease, you have very different presentations. The other thing that's interesting, back when I was in graduate school, we did a study with neurologists out at UCLA, and that research has been borne out many times that oftentimes with vascular dementia, you see more behavioral problems than the initial stages of Alzheimer's disease. Next slide, John. And as I already said, it's really kind of funny, early in my career, there was this big news, this thing called Alzheimer's disease, and everybody forgot about vascular disease. Every 5-10 years, I see this, the study and rediscovering vascular disease. So in truth, in clinical practice, I see a lot of mixed dementia where, I think what's really important is that if you have two people that have identical genetic risk for Alzheimer's disease and one has a good cardiovascular system and one has a poor cardiovascular system, the one with the poor cardiovascular system is going to show symptoms, a couple 3 years sooner than the person who has good cardiovascular system. So these things really interplay. Next slide, John. So frontal temporal dementia in the prototype that everybody knows about is Bruce Willis. Oftentimes it's difficult to distinguish from Alzheimer's disease. Oftentimes, misdiagnosis Alzheimer's disease now because of for neurologists, so much as it's difficult to tell them apart initially. Sometimes, I've seen cases, that I thought for sure were frontal temporal dementia, turned out to be, Alzheimer's disease when they have it. So, it goes both ways. But it's less well known. Usually, it's typically underdiagnosed. Tends to be called, diagnosis Alzheimer's disease. Incidence rates depend on the study of methodology. They're just all over the place. So I don't think anybody knows exactly how common it's. It's the second most common form of degenerative dementias, and they're really it's a collection of diseases. The most common one is Pick's disease. But that probably comprises maybe 30% of frontotemporal dementias. Some prion disease, like the Dr. Freudsfeld, is presents as a frontotemporal dementia, and like Alzheimer's disease is those who have abnormal deposition of protein in the brain, typically tau. Uh, uh, and again, because it's hitting the frontal lobes, it affects its executive functioning, and it also affects, the behavior, impulsiveness, disinhibition, and usually it affects those more than memory. So one of the frontal lobes, you have the dorsal lateral frontal lobes, and then you have the orbital medial frontal lobes. When I was talking about the executor of the brain with the CPU computer, the thing that you load the memory, the program into to do work and to solve problems, that's the dorsal lateral frontal lobes. Well, so it's difficult to do that when you're thinking about lunch, and you're thinking of, or you're thinking about sex, about, emotional turmoils or those things. So this orbital medial portion of the frontal lobe, this right above the eye sockets there, those connections go right down into the limbic areas. And so what that orbital medial frontal lobe does is it controls it can inhibit these other, it can inhibit the limbic areas so that you can do work, so that you're not, you can shut down the emotional or hunger, you can shut that stuff down so you can work. And if you have compromised in orbital frontal medial, shut that stuff down. So stuff that you would normally inhibit and not say what you're thinking, how it comes, and this isn't just functional glitches, that these areas can be affected in Alzheimer's disease as well. And the other thing about functional dementia, it oftentimes presents earlier at a younger age versus faster. The Alzheimer's disease, early onset Alzheimer's disease can present in the late 50s, early 60s, but more typically Alzheimer's disease presents in the mid to late 70s, or as you get the person gets older, the percentage of people presenting with Alzheimer's disease goes up. In Alzheimer's disease, usually runs its course in onset of symptoms at the end 7 to 9 years, that period. These days it may be stretching out a little bit longer. The frontotemporal dementia you talked about more typically present onset in the 60s and late 50s, and it can run its course in 3 to 5 years. I've seen cases when there was 2 years.
Does that mean to death, or does that mean it's
Next slide, John. Lewy body dementia. This one is really under-recognized, and oftentimes the initial stage is the person is diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, because sometimes it presents with a tremor. But unlike Parkinson's disease, where cognitive impairment is very rare until the later stages, you have the cognitive impairment very early on. And the cognitive problems are primarily just executive frontal lobe kinds of problems, also some problems planning, organizing, and again, because of the orbital medial involvement to the frontal lobes, behavioral symptoms, impulsiveness, disinhibition. But the real calling card for Lewy body dementia is very prominent visual hallucinations or losses, and we're very distressing. So one of the and one of the conundrums, and we'll talk about this a little bit, but when it's misdiagnosed as Parkinson's, again, not because it's bad neurology, but it looks like Parkinson's mostly. Really good neurology. Well, at least know that there's something not quite typical of Parkinson's, but the the way you treat Parkinson's disease is by giving them dopamine agonist, something that increases the amount of dopamine. Parkinson's disease, the substantia nigra, black stuff, very looks black on proteins, they have where the dopamine is made in the brainstem, carries its brain. That starts dying. And so what you do is you try to increase the amount of dopamine to reduce the tremor people would describe as dopamine. The thing is that when schizophrenia, the thing that you're trying to block to make the person not psychotic is dopamine. Okay, so there are lots of different dopamine receptors in the brain, at least 5, probably 4, but there are different kinds of dopamine receptors used in different systems. So the ones that are responsible for hallucinations in illusions in the schizophrenic, for example, are in the medial temporal areas, and there are other dopamine receptors that are very important and that strive in the motor pathway, the microstriatal pathway. Right. And the old drugs for schizophrenia used to block everything. Okay, and so you could turn off the hallucinations at the expense of making the person Parkinson's. Patients were early days before we had the atypical epileptics we have today. It was a trade-off. Parkinson's one patient it was crazy. So the problem with treating this with Parkinson's drugs, which oftentimes happens, is that you can, and especially if the hallucinations haven't presented themselves yet, you can really drive the hallucinations. You know, we have more specific drugs now than once for the dopamine blockers treat so that you can block the mesolimbic dopamine receptors and leave the motor ones alone. Okay, so but you can when you're trying to treat Parkinson's, when you're trying to treat Parkinson's, I think about the standard retired physician, who had Parkinson's disease, and the boy, if he just lived with the hallucinations, because it would drive hallucinations, but he could tell, he was a very bright guy, he could tell the difference, but he'd rather deal with the hallucinations than not be able to move, so, get into these trade-offs, and get that kind of problem with the body dimension as well. Next slide, John.
Question about hallucinations. Did they occur while awake or asleep or did you hear about a lot of terror?
Yeah.
Bad dreams.
Yeah, they're the ones that hallucinations are fun. You have dreams and oftentimes with Parkinson's disease, it's early stages, and the Paul Russell's syndrome, a lot of dispersed Parkinson's disease. So I'm also much about doing body damage that's supposed to be experience. So in Parkinson's disease, it has covered a lot of this. It presents with cognitive rigidity. We probably neurologists at this, and it doesn't have the smooth, response. Wide-based gait with small steps. French foot or teapot. The mask face, the lack of facial expression. The cognitive symptoms usually absent, but mild with the disease as the late stages, 8 to 10 years in, you can start to see some appreciable effect on their psychological and executive functioning. But when the person's having hallucinations, trust me, it's caused by the drugs and using it's not, and the neurologist will seldom acknowledge that it's their drugs that are causing. I don't describe them the joy of being a PhD drug. So, drugs cause hallucination of Parkinson's. Next slide, John. Traumatic brain injury. Severe TBI is a brain injury that results in coma. Will typically result in permanent decrease in cognitive functioning. The cognitive function will recover somewhat 6 to 12 months after the injury, but usually never fully recovers after severe injury. Interestingly, we know for 10 to 15, 20 years now that if you have that combination of APOE alleles, the outside alleles, then you don't recover as well. And people who have severe traumatic, moderate to severe traumatic, or also have increased risk of Alzheimer's. Next slide, John.
Question. So when we watch football, they take this person into the tent.
Yeah.
What are they looking for?
They're looking, they're doing concussion protocols. They're doing some cognitive, quick cognitive neurologic screens to see if they meet criteria for concussion. And with actually, if you go to the next slide here, the mild TBIs and injury results in concussion, and it results in some loss of brain cells, typically overall affects cognitive function for days, weeks, or even months. But the neuropsychological testing typically returns to normal in 1 to 3 months for a single concussion. So but repeated concussion or even repeated subconcussive dosing may lead to chronic traumatic encephalopathy. One thing, and it's not in the slides here, but if there's swelling that goes on the brain and inflammation, and so if you have a second concussion while your brain is still not fully recovered from the first concussion, the effect of the second concussion can be exponential. Okay, so it's extremely important to not to return to play, until your brain has had a chance to fully recover. And there's a release of the tau protein in the small questions. There's a number of inflammatory factors. They're working on. They've made some progress in blood tests to see if they detect tau in the bloodstream, for example, to because it's very different, with the veterans, you're dealing with compensation growth. It's very difficult. Everybody wants to have a disability from having a concussion. That's too broad, but it's something you have to deal with as a neuropsychologist. We have flexibilities protecting, for effort. But in football, it's just the opposite. You're motivated to get back on the field this week, this play, and so they will fake good instead of faking bad. So that is a real problem. So yeah, so they're checking. They're checking the concussion protocol because you don't want to send them on the field while they're things like these guys having multiple concussions, and you can mitigate the effect of secondary concussion. Next.
So when particularly like in the Army, things where they have these very high-end more Holisters and things like that with this huge shock wave that they produce.
Right.
How do those people get through with concussion stuff?
Well, that gets there haven't been good studies done with people who have just the housing Hauser, the rocket propelled things, you know, that. So it's difficult to know how much damage those cause, you know, but it's not a good thing to rattle around the brain. So, you know,
Because I know like, or at least when I read, it's, you know, when they used to use battleships, these 16-inch guns, the concussion wave, that was huge.
Yeah.
And that could wipe out a whole bunch
yeah,
of-
it's not insignificant.
Yeah.
Again, we have good evidence now to provide people, the soldiers have been exposed to explosions, provides, you know, explosive devices like these. You know, the evidence is good. The evidence, you know, how much damage and how many times you need to be exposed to big guns before, you know, that's all still up for study. Next slide. Um, next one.
Oh,
So, symptomatic treatments for Alzheimer's disease. There are FDA drugs available for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease, memory disorders, but they treat symptoms only, not the causes of Alzheimer's disease. These drugs do not stop the progression of the disease, but they do help the brain function better for a longer period of time. Vitamins or counter supplements generally not proven to be effective. Prevagen, you know, and you know, there's no evidence of it. But there have been a few recent studies that show that this has just been the last year or two that have shown taking a vitamin can increase risk, and some of those studies have been placebo controlled. You know, so it's not all correlation. So multivitamin. Next slide, John.
Yep.
Next one.
I'm hitting the wrong spot.
The most common one that you probably encountered for treatment of Alzheimer's disease is this donepezil, otherwise known as Aricept, and it prevents the breakdown of acetylcholine in your brain, which is decreased in Alzheimer's disease. Acetylcholine is necessary for the hippocampus to do its work, storing episodic memories. And preventing the breakdown of the acetylcholine means you got more acetylcholine around. And donepezil is more effective when started early during the mild cognitive impairment or mild dementia stages, not so really effective in the later stages. It slows the rate of the functional decline of the disease process. Don't expect it to be going with it. You know, neurologists understand this, but you know, even MD, you know, family docs and gerontologists, I work with them, gerontologists kind of drove me crazy. They prescribed donepezil, you know, early appropriately, you know, the patient didn't get better after 6 months. So they discontinued. Well, that's not what the study said. I mean, the double-blind studies that have been done, okay, you give people donepezil or you give them a placebo, and you come back a year later, both groups are worse. Okay, but the ones that got the donepezil are more fun. Their memory is more functional still. That doesn't make you live one day longer with Alzheimer's disease. The disease progresses, but you're juicing the brain and getting more out of it, you know, for a couple of years. Okay, donepezil. And so, you know, you have to set up the expectation correctly. You don't set it up correctly with the family. Family said, "Oh, listen to," and they stop taking. And the same thing. And next slide, John. When the Alzheimer's disease progresses to the moderate dementia state, a good neurologist or a gerontologist will add an addenda. It works as a different mechanism of action, but you add it to the and again, it doesn't stop decline, or I'm sorry, it doesn't stop the progression of disease, but the functional decline is less steep. Next slide, John.
Dermatologists,
They will prescribe them, you know, so it's, in their primary treatments. So it can have great ones and some might not be enough to use some medications. Not a lot of experience. So there are no medications yet available to treat the cause of Alzheimer's disease. The trials are underway with drugs that are designed to reduce the beta amyloid plaque and tau deposition. If you follow the news, Biogen has recently announced the withdrawal of Acula from the market. It reduced it was very controversial by the FDA because the data showed that it decreased the beta amyloid plaque, but it didn't. But there wasn't any time to improve. The decision was not unanimous. Scientific advisors. The reasoning was, well, there wasn't anything else to treat it with. But it doesn't. But that drug, but just this last year, a second one was approved. Could be for people with mild Alzheimer's disease, mild cognitive impairment, and phase 3 medicine showed slow cognitive decline. Okay, and it also decreases the beta amyloid plaque. The thing that doesn't, there is significant risk of infarction. You know, maybe up to 10% of people have strokes. So it's not something you take lightly. So there's significant risk with both of those. I think that what could be is probably better than the other one, but it's still a significant risk for stroke. So we do not fully understand the Alzheimer's disease process. We know the beta amyloid plaque and deposition on the void. All right, and just a couple more slides. Yeah. Just behavioral management of dementia. External supports are important. Lists, post reminders, electronic reminders, serial tasking rather than multitasking, decrease distracting stimuli, decreasing the pace and complexity of communications. Oftentimes, you know, the problem in understanding this is the process problem, so it's important not to go too fast. Being non-confrontational, patient non-confrontational repetition, modeling what needs to be done, and help with initiation. Next slide.
what is help with initiation?
Because sometimes it just can't get started. So, you know, helping them start, get started once you get started, something we call procedural memory often kicks in for everyday tasks. And at that time, we talk.
Like reminding them to start eating?
What's that?
Like reminding them to start eating?
Yeah. And sometimes in more advanced stages, you know, even sometimes some physical meetings.
We're getting late at first, but you know, and you guys, I don't know about you specifically, I'm not gonna believe you. A real clinical look at this thing, you know, and it comes down to, well, there's one thing I was wondering about is the cost of drugs is one thing that really has an effect on it, and there's a huge effect on families. These people are living it, you know. I mean, it's a very different thing, and you're trying to improve whatever connection between this piece and that piece, and you like to see that, but you know, it's a huge and overall thing, and it costs a lot. So big, huge.
Well, the old drugs that have the cell are very cheap. The new one, you know, costs
The overbeat stuff,
the older drugs, you know, the newer drugs that when they just came out, that probably costs $50,000 a year. So, slide again. So, as we mentioned earlier, behavioral personality changes are generally more difficult for families to deal with. We probably talk about physical aggression isn't always that, it's not that common, but it's not infrequent either. Next slide. So practical things, and I end up spending a lot of time with families trying to, do counseling, trying to talk through this. I've been through it with my own parents, and, so, I know it's very different. You're dealing with, crisis, And my mom, when she was demented, we still do have to push my buttons. But in general, trying to just decrease the stimulus noise, disengage to allow the person to reset, simplify, talk less. Sometimes people talk more. Sometimes that just increases the agitation. Sometimes it's better to talk less. Or we did redirect rather than confront. Never underestimate the primary power of primary reinforcer on the bullets. Seriously. Model what needs to be done. Avoid moderate, what I call moderate or ascension, persons with dementia, even though people say, oh, it's like a 2-year-old or 3-year-old. Yeah, some of the behavior may be, but that's not the case. And a lot of people time. So that's it. I'm sorry for going over, but we got started in 2 minutes late.
Yeah.
So we have to run to fire. Email and like to talk with.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. First, we're gonna have one tonight at the 16.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. I know.
That's got the camera.
Send you this slide. I'm sure because she's.
I could do is send him an email and I can copy the slides. That's awesome.
I know you saying this slide.
Thanks for doing it.
Yeah.
I don't want to-
And his wife is next week. So I'm not sure what she's gonna talk about yet. See, that guy gets plugged in.
Thank you, Don.
Welcome.
And that email too.
What?
You can try this. Yes, I finished your message. I was in class right now. Every night, so anyway, sober and my computer keeps like in Gmail, it keeps coming out with good grades, 98, 99%. I